Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the January 2023 meeting of the Philipstown Conservation Board. Happy New Year to everybody. Let's begin with December's minutes. Has everybody looked at them? I know that myself and Rob made a few minor corrections and sent them in.
I looked at them, but if you made corrections, we haven't seen your
They're
corrections.
tiny.
So.
It's more like if something said stuff, we would put a parentheses, documents.
Okay.
It was clarifications. I think that's what you did too, Rob.
Yeah, sometimes the words just didn't make sense,
Right.
so I just kind of clarified the wording.
Yeah.
Because it's a transcription.
Right.
Okay.
So
I'll go with the minutes.
Okay, do I have a motion to accept December's minutes?
Motion to accept December's minutes.
And the second, please? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Okay, let's go to new business, Garrison Station Plaza. Somebody representing?
Good evening. My name's James Copeland. I'm with Hudson Design. You've received copies of the plans for the house that was the former Murray Prescott's house that we're restoring. It does happen to be within the 100-foot setback from the water. The changes we're making to the building are we've gotten rid of the asbestos. There is a plan to make the house a single-family rental property, and we have abandoned the use of the basement for any kind of occupancy. It'll be for storage, but we did decide that the water level rises too much to make that a habitable spot, and we're keeping the building within the confines of the existing footprint. We are taking up what is was poorly conceived front porch. It was prone to bring the water into the basement. So our intent is to break up the concrete, put in proper foundation drains, and rebuild the front porch. In the rear yard, we are taking off two poorly constructed vestibules, and I'm returning the yard to its former state. And I think that's it. You received copies of the plans?
We received copies of the plans, and I had asked Cheryl to reach out to your architects, which was successfully done for photographs, because I thought that this was such a simple project that the photographs would speak 1,000 words, and we probably wouldn't need to do a site visit to expedite the process.
Okay. Did you receive the photographs? Okay. Just a note, the last page of the photographs, they show the house in its original state. The front porch was a simple, it had a ridge, a shed ridge, and we're going back to the original design. We're taking off the simple shed, and we're putting back something that has the original shape. It has a sloped, faceted roof. We're also going back to the original column spacing. Before it was, it had had a dissimilar spacing, and we're going back to equal. Yes, we're keeping the board and batten siding, and I think it will be a great addition to that part of town when it's done.
It's a great photograph, too, the last one. Do we have comments, questions?
I have a question. Sorry. Jamie, in your plan, you mentioned that you're going to be putting in footings for a deck in the back?
Yes.
And can you just explain to us how that will be established and what you're going to be doing there? Sonic loops or what?
We're having two doors that lead out to the back, and the thought was to have a deck just for private use. There will not be a set of steps going down to the backyard, but it would be a wood or a composite deck in the back.
So it'll be a deck off what is the main floor from the
Yes.
front? right?
Yes.
Okay. And what sort of structure will you have under, will you need to do concrete piers, or what's the idea there?
There will be concrete piers and then wooden posts anchored to the top of the piers.
Other questions, comments? Max, your thoughts?
I think that it'd be appropriate to vote on a permit if the board's comfortable to move forward with it without.
Since you mentioned the water flow into the basement, would you do anything like, to put in sub pumps or anything like that to try and, provide some alternative if it does flood to pump out?
Well, the hope is that if we can control it outside the building, we don't want to have the moisture in the building if we can prevent it. That's the goal of the new work, is to keep the moisture out of the basement.
Okay. By changing the decking in the front and the back?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and adding drainage, foundation drains.
Okay. So you think that's the source for the water coming off of the poorly designed front deck?
Yeah, and it's also because there is rock that the rock exists also in the basement. So they're no doubt part of the same ledge. So you really have to go back outside if you want to try and contain it. But that would be the first line of defense. But we ultimately know that those basements in that area of the landing have the common problem. The water just so we're not counting on it to be occupiable space, but first thought is to get it out of the building altogether.
Any other comments or questions?
Just on the construction narrative, you say straw or hay bales. We used to have this convention about straw rather than hay bales, just because hay can bring invasives into the area.
Yes, I should know better.
This is
My horses eat
super
hay;
funny.
they don't eat straw.
There you go. So
Okay.
give the hay to your horses. Keep the straw for this project.
Okay, well done.
Okay. Somebody willing to make a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Magazzino has decided to postpone.
Right.
Okay, so then we're on to Jonathan and Anna Maria Pierce.
Good evening, Chairperson, members of the board. Maximilian Mahalik on the behalf of the applicants. For the record, I am with the law firm of Cuddy and Fader. We did submit a letter into the record last week. I will be brief out of respect for the board's time, but just going to highlight some of our main points. So we know this project has been in the work for a long time, and we're excited to see it come to fruition. It's going to have a range of environmental benefits. We've seen water running off from neighboring properties onto our property and pooling on there, and we've seen the presence of invasive species, which we want to work with the board and the town to mitigate. Now, the project, I would just like to know, involves a planting density that satisfy industry standards as guided to us by our landscaping consultant. It's actually more on the progressive end of things with a planting density currently proposed of 4 feet 10 inches. And that's just, again, to reiterate some of the benefits along with the fact that it is increasing biodiversity on the site. Now, turning to a bit of the history here, there was a conditional approval in July. And one of the conditions was to establish surety to finance the implementation of the landscaping plan. Now, as we understand, what that currently looks like, based on conversations with the board and with staff and from the minutes, is a bond of $50,000 or more for a life of up to 5 years with a survival rate of 95%. Now, it is just unclear from reviewing the record how that specific amount was reached, but we would like to note that this represents a significant cost burden for the applicant, especially when considering the applicant has already budgeted 10% for landscaping mitigation into their construction budget. In addition, we'd like to note that this site, there's a bit of a temperamental nature. There's wetlands with a wetland buffer. There's histories in the past, both impacting the site and our broader region of flooding and drought. I'll collect all my pencils at the end if they fall out of my folder. But when looking at that 95% survivability requirement, we do feel that this is difficult in the context of the site. We'd also like to note that due to this increased planting density, we understand that even if there is an unexpected major die-off in the future, this still allows us to achieve industry standards of planting. Now, just to surmise, as we understand, 50,000 amount, 95% survivability rate. If there are different bond terms proposed, we would ask the board or staff to please advise on that note, just to clarify, so we can work together with the mutual understanding of what is being requested. We would note that there is no record of a similar wetland permit or related wetland bond being required for other premises along Rockwald Road. Now, this is based on a review of the documents made available to us in Town Hall that is based on our personal knowledge of those files. If there are files the board has in mind, we ask that we be directed to those specific files for review. But we would like to note that it does seem unusual for a performance bond to be required for a project involving a single-family home. Many of the contractors and consultants we go to, and these are the folks that are experienced in single-family home versus larger developments, the ones experienced in single-family home, they're surprised to see bond requirements, and they're not really sure how to work in that context, and they're not really sure what that means. Typically, we'll see these type of requirements for larger projects, subdivision applications with performance bonds, for example. So I just kind of want to explain our applicant's perspective on this request for the bond and some of the concerns therein. But the applicant, as I said, does want to work with the board to move this project forward and to ensure a proper landscaping planting and to ensure mitigation of invasive species and some of the other issues that have been on the site in the past. Now, on that front, one thing that's been proposed, as articulated in our letter of last week, is that the plantings be implemented on a set schedule with annual or semi-annual inspections by staff. Now, if it is clear that the planting plan is not being followed by the applicant, an escrow account can be established to fund mitigation work by the town, overseen by its consultants. Now, this has several benefits. This minimizes costs up front to enable the applicant to realize the project quickly, including all the environmental benefits thereof. It allows the applicant to reasonably respond to unforeseen conditions such as flooding or drought. It allows for flexibility in the planting plan as needed, implementing a test and learn strategy to determine what species are successful. It shortens time burdens on the applicant, particularly in light of the fact that the applicant expects to have most plantings done in the first 2 years by the time the home is completed. It avoids burdens on the town and in establishing the bond and going through those required processes. And it reduces resources therein, or reliance on those resources. We'd also like to note that, for the record, this does seem to be a generous mechanism in light of the lack of, at least our personal knowledge, of wetland permits and related wetland bonds being required for other properties along Rockwald Road. And again, if there are any other records on that note, we ask that we be directed to them to view them, but based on our knowledge of the records that we've been able to see in Town Hall, we haven't seen any records therein. Just to note, there are a number of alternative other enforcement mechanisms that we'd be happy to discuss with the board. Potential examples include pulling construction approvals or even a CO, certificate of occupancy, if the planting plan is not implemented in a reasonable method. And I think that really underscores the applicant's willingness to work with the board and the town to implement that planting plan. When they're highlighting that one of the conditions could be a pulling of the CO, really the concern here is the cost of the bond and the timing requirements and the survivability rate, that 95% survivability rate in a temperamental site. Alternatives also may include obtaining a letter of credit. And it's also noted for the record that the town has other enforcement mechanisms, such as stop work orders and civil and even criminal sanctions. Again, going through all of this is just to highlight that the client is seeking, or excuse me, our applicant is seeking a reasonable, manageable, achievable tool to provide the guarantee that the landscaping plan will be implemented while avoiding those burdens that have been associated with the bond as we understand it to be proposed. The applicant just wants to avoid those cost burdensome and potentially, for them, unrealistic requirements under the bond as they understand it. Now, if a bond is to be required still, the applicant respectfully requests that it be shortened to 2 years. Now, this is in light of several factors, including potential unforeseen events such as droughts or floods that might make a 95% survivability rate over 5 years difficult. Now, holding the applicant to a 2-year bond, that's going to be feasible in light of the fact that most of the planting will be done within that 2-year period by the time the home is completed. In fact, the greatest expenditure in planting will come with at the same time as the completion of the home. And just in our conversations that we've had with town staff, and by this I specifically mean the applicant's conversations before our firm was retained, we understand that there have been references to past bonds being required that had a life of around 2 years. So we understand that that's been a measurement that's been utilized in the past. Now, we look forward to discussing with the board potential alternatives, but we really just hope to find a mechanism that is going to achieve the goals of both the applicant and the town in bringing this project to fruition and protecting the environment and addressing the environmental issues that have been on the site up until this point. And happy to answer any questions.
Okay, let's begin with the simplest, which is without doing the research, I'm going to assume that everything that has been previously built on Rockwald was done before the town updated their zoning. And some of it was done before the wetland regulations, Chapter 93, were updated significantly over 10 years ago. With that said, myself and Max, sitting next to me, our natural resource officer, had a discussion with the town attorney, Steve Gather, in regards to this. And what he feels is that, yes, a letter of credit does make sense. That essentially it's at the town board level to decide what the amount should be with our recommendations from the Conservation Board. In terms of timing, normally for something like this, 5 years is reasonable. 2 or 3 years most likely is not reasonable. When you talk about pulling a CO or having some other civil action done, that is someplace that the town nor this board wants to go. It becomes an adversarial situation rather than making sure that it is done and that there is some type of we'll call it economic incentive to do this without being ridiculously burdensome. The lot that was picked is difficult. The plans that were laid out by the engineering firm and the architectural firm as well as they had hired a landscape architect. I think all of us found them to be very commendable. So we would like to see them implemented as much as possible. We do also understand that particularly when it comes to restoration and mitigation of invasive species, it's an ongoing project. I'll make an analogy. It's like trying to treat a patient for cancer. That's not terminal. You need to keep changing therapies and lessening side effects till it actually works. So with that, I think what we should discuss now is what type of recommendations we want to make to the town board, because that's where it now needs to go. I think we're very close. I think many of the recommendations we made hold fast.
Yes.
I don't think that 5 years is unreasonable. Okay, and I think that, using something like a letter of credit becomes far more viable. We really should not be in the situation of discussing right now what amount we feel makes sense. I think that's more to the town board, but the work that needs to be done is not potentially inexpensive if it's not done. And I won't say we were looking at a worst-case scenario, but we were looking at a case where adherence to the plan was not optimal, was suboptimal. Do I have other thoughts from the board? And Max, also please jump in, because you were on our conversation with Mr. Gather.
No, I think that summarized it, really well. I think too, that, just to clarify, the 95% survival rate is something that gets assessed every year. So that metric is essentially what you're shooting for every year. So if you have a die-off that brings you to 80%, it doesn't mean that you're out the bond amount. It just means that we want to see you bring the plantings back to that 95% threshold. So it doesn't mean that in this instance, we may not go down the bonding route at all. It would be the letter of credit that Andy mentioned and you mentioned as well. But falling below that doesn't qualify you as a failure of the project. It's that metric that just needs to be brought back to. I don't know if that was understood completely across that 5-year period. So the financial burden there really, as long as you're keeping up with the watering and barring any real unforeseen circumstances, it's really just doing an annual check and making sure that whatever you're falling below just gets replenished until that 5-year period is up.
So Chairperson, if I may, just a couple comments?
Of course.
Great, thank you. So on the timing of the letter of credit, and first I want to thank Mr. Garfinkel and the board members for exploring this letter of credit option versus a traditional bond. But in terms of the timing, it does sound like the board has an opinion about where a recommendation to the town board might go. Would we be permitted, and I know this would be with the town clerk and the town board, but we have a great consultant team who feel strongly about how they can get this planting plan implemented in a timely fashion and hit goal marks in a timely fashion to have the planting largely completed by the time the home is completed, building in extra little time at the end there for mitigation. So on the timing front, I believe that the applicant would be submitting their own, potentially a letter to the town board, because it does sound like the town board will be deciding the final terms of the letter of credit. One of our concerns, and Mr. Garfinkel, maybe you can shed some light on this, is, and having heard your comment about 95% doesn't necessarily mean you're counting every single planting that day, but in a situation where, say, in 2 years there is a drought or a year of storms, and is there going to be a built-in capacity for the applicant to show that reasonable efforts have been undertaken to implement the planting? Because we're just scared once we're getting to 5 years out, we don't know what the climate's going to look like in 5 years, and that creates some potential risks.
I think that's a discussion we need to have, because ultimately looking past kind of the administrative side of things, the board wants this plan to succeed, essentially. So coming up with a solution that fits both of those goals is really what we want ultimately. It's not really looking to chastise or, claim that bond or claim that amount of money and say this project completely failed. That's the opposite of what we intend for the restoration work. So I don't know, that's a discussion that I think that kind of gets answered by putting that 95% threshold in there, is that we want to see somebody's feet held to, even if there is some unforeseen circumstance, that communication stays open between the applicants and the town, and we come up with solutions to kind of achieve the success of the project as it was laid out. Typically, the easiest way that's done is by giving those survivability metrics.
But with that said, both in managing invasive species and trying to rehabilitate, you can't always use just numbers.
Right.
Because we might find that a particular plant which is native and should be there for some reason is not thriving, and something else will need to be changed. And it might be something that's easier or something that's more difficult. But essentially, the whole idea was to make sure that this is done, and part of it is objective from a scientific standpoint, and some of it becomes somewhat subjective because things change. Yes, we agree, climate could change. We could have severe flooding, or like we had a good part of this summer, have drought. We're not looking to be punitive by any means. We just want to see as much of this done as possible. Unfortunately, from the legal standpoint, lawyers always want everything pretty much to try to be black and white and protect their clients, and I understand that. I don't think, unfortunately, there are not the perfect guidelines. So we're trying to get to a point where we feel that the work will be done and it will be managed by both your consultants as well as overseen by Max.
Could we maybe do two things? So you have a metric, right, that's quantitative right now, because you have the target of the aspirational target every year, 95%, and then you kind of replant back to 95%. Could you put some type of qualitative metric at the end of the 5-year point that showed that they did the diligence to try and improve things, and that there was, based on expert opinion, an improvement that just meets that criteria, so they feel that we're not punitive in trying to get the bond, we're just trying to make it better, because that is the intent. Like we want just success. The bond is just an incentive to be successful and go out and water.
I think that's a wonderful point, Rob, and I shouldn't have been using objective and subjective. I think quantitative and qualitative states it very, very well, and I think that would really suit everybody.
So, Chairperson, I do think that in any recommendation from this board to the town board, having some element of that qualitative discussion in there helps make it clear, that reasonable actions taken by the applicant to ensure the planting plan is implemented as proposed on a timely fashion. Those reasonable efforts will be taken into consideration, and we just want to avoid the appearance that say there's different folks, someone making an interpretation 5 years from now, what does that 95% metric mean? We just want to make sure there's some flexibility in there to ensure that the client can implement that try and survive theory that I mentioned in my points about what kind of species are going to be successful. Now, on the front of the letter of credit, may I ask if the board's familiar with any examples of letter of credits being implemented by the town board, or any projects that this board has been involved in that we might be able to take a look at to get our understanding of what that would look like for the applicant and the obligations therein, particularly the financial obligations?
That would have to go to the town board / the town attorney.
So I know in the fall that there was outreach to the town attorney, and particularly there was actually an email sent regarding a letter of credit. No response was ever received, but we are happy to make that outreach again to the town attorney to get that conversation going. But we just wanted to note for the record that that has been something that's been inquired into.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I'll apologize for the town that somehow that got lost in the cracks. I think what we should do is, Cheryl, if you would, I mean, what was the last thing we had? Recommendations on a conditional permit? Suggestions, or were we at a memo point?
It was a conditional permit.
It was,
a
yeah,
condi-
yeah.
So I think what we should do is, I think we should redistribute the conditional permit. And in the next, like, week or two, I would like everybody to comment on it. And then Max and I will put together, which we'll share with you, a memo that's going to go to the town board of what we think is reasonable when they look at, you know, is it an escrow, which something tells me it's not going to be, because I think it's going to be more than the $5,000 or $1,000 that probably most people would want to put in an escrow, give or take a little. And a bond might actually be more reasonable and a bond, a letter of credit might be more reasonable and comfortable for everybody involved.
I do think
And we will look at, I think, Rob's suggestions of qualitative and quantitative measures, and the balance between them is very, very important, and I think it will be better for everybody.
Chairperson, thank you for this guidance, and just to note, I do think that if the letter of credit can provide an opportunity that doesn't create such a financial burden as a traditional bond would for the applicant, I do think that will allow for that flexibility, and we've already discussed having the qualitative and quantitative discussion, so we look forward to that memo, and then we could resolve, once, the next steps would be then to resolve it out with the town board, as I understand. Okay.
Yeah, and I think the best mechanism to reach the town board and get on their agenda would be to go through the town clerk's office, and then engage with them that way, if you're not hearing back from the attorneys.
Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would just like to comment for the record that a bond is an appropriate remedy for this, or a control for making sure that mitigation does happen. It's in our code. So at the beginning, it sounded a little bit like this was something that was like, you know, out of nowhere, but this is part of our code. So that it is the kind of remedy that makes, it's a tool for us to use, and we may be using it in the future. I just don't want it, I don't want it to sound like we can't use it. We can.
I appreciate the clarification. I think for the reasons put forth today, that a letter of credit might be more feasible for our particular project, but we did note it in the code, and I believe New York, and no lawyer should ever start getting into case law. I know everyone wants a long night, or short night, excuse me, but I believe that the case law is usually that, you know, a bond amount has to be established based on reasonable estimates of construction, and the same will come up, I'm sure, in the surety letter terms. But we do think that an alternative option from a bond would be a little more feasible, just from our client's perspective, because they're very excited to have this project come to fruition and get the invasive species out of there.
And I think, and just for the record, that's the approach the board took, was asking their professionals to come up with a cost estimate to establish the total bond amount. So that was circulated to the board, and estimates were brought before us, so.
Understood, and we'll speak with our team.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other comments, suggestions? Okay, so Cheryl, if you could distribute conditional permit to all of us, and I'll prod everybody to make comments, so you and I can put together within 2 weeks,
Sure.
if that, a memo to the board.
Thank you,
Town
board. Thank you, staff, board members, chairperson. Appreciate it.
Thank
And
you.
we look forward to the
Thank you
memo.
for coming in.
Yep.
Okay. Do we have any, Max, do we have any other business? We're not going through Prins tonight.
We're not. He sent me a text, thank you.
No, the two items, one would be that we got the annual report from Lashinju. I don't know if everybody's been able to look that over.
Yeah, I took it.
And I guess the second The second was that I received the water quality information and soil testing information from the Hudson Highlands Land Trust for the Garrison Golf Course soil removal project, and everything seems to be fine. The removal went well. There was no breach of the silt fence or anything like that, so I can circulate those results as well to the board, but I'll send them to Cheryl to send to everybody. So.
Yeah, and we had correspondence that went to myself and Cheryl, and I had forwarded to Max. There's an unfortunate situation on Old Albany Post Road 212, which would be in the southern portion, that there's somebody that's dumping garbage continuously all over the place. And while it is in a tiny wetland, it's not jurisdictional to us, but the code enforcement officer has cited them. The landowner, because he has somebody that's renting a tenant, was brought in and made an appearance last week, and I guess they're scheduled for a repeat appearance next week, and hopefully that will be resolved. But I didn't think it was necessary to burden everybody with that, and it's not a jurisdiction right now, though it's an unfortunate situation.
Yeah.
So, anybody have anything else?
I have one little thing. So Cheryl, long ago, and Andy and Lou, you will remember this, Bob, you probably will too, we used to have these cute little books that had the code, right? Our little
Yes.
handbooks. Is there any way we can get those again? Mine's gone. I don't know, I've thumbed through it enough where it's disintegrated, I don't know, but they're really good to just
You don't
have-
like going online?
Well, it's, I feel rude when I go online with my phone during a meeting.
I was
So-
able to print it out from the town website and just put it in a little folder. It's exhausting.
nice 'cause it was really
They were-
tiny.
It was awesome.
was
Just
the
this
perfect
little,
size,
the
like a-
little tiny, can we get those, do you think?
Yeah,
Okay.
look into it.
Thanks. They're just nice to
I
have.
have a couple of extra copies. If I found at my house, I can bring a couple of them in.
Well,
But we should get the
certainly our
whole-
n-
yeah.
Yeah, but certainly our new members,
Yeah.
I think it would be handy to have. And it's really, I have to say, a few of our applicants have prompted me to read through all the code again.
Yeah.
And it's really good to wrap your head around that code, because it just makes you understand more what is in our purview and what is not in our purview. And it's just good. So, anyway.
I'm all for it, even though I look at it digitally when it comes to reading books. I like the paper,
Yeah.
and I still look at newspapers, so I'm all for it. If we could see if that exists, if not, I'm sure we could make printouts.
Yeah. Okay,
So-
great.
Okay?
Usually reference books are easier because you can kind of flip through them and stuff like that. On the Kindle, at least, I have a hard time kind of going through things.
Yeah, I like to highlight and all that old-fashioned stuff,
Hit the
right?
wrong button and you're lost, so.
Yeah.
Okay, anybody have anything else?
So, what's the next step for Prins, though, since I know they're not here today, but I saw the letter, went through that but is there just another
Since they're
step?
not here, I'd rather not discuss it in great detail, but Max and I, and particularly myself, have been in touch with Ron Gaynor, our town engineer. We are only one agency that should be involved with this. Site disturbances, as you saw in the memo, anything over 2,000 feet of any sort need planning board. As well as we're dealing with steep slopes, we're dealing with different code issues, such as if he moves the pool to where it would be the Hudson Overlay District, it becomes the planning board, as well as zoning. So at this point, I'm going to be curious what they come back with, but I think we're going to be, I think we're going to be referring out.
He's aware of the letter from Ron Gaynor?
Yes, it was sent to
Okay.
him, and I had a response from him, a detailed response, which I will forward to everybody, just so you have it. I didn't get it till late this afternoon.
Did you? Oh, it's on the table.
That's what was okay. Yeah, so. But essentially, I think I think we're in a situation that it's an incomplete application as presented. So, and we'll go from there. Okay? Anything else? Well, this is not a speed record, but it's quick. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.